Welcome to the Future of Field Service podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. I am welcoming back to the podcast today Mr. Roy Dockery, who is the Vice President of Field Operations at Flock Safety and author. So we are going to be talking today about Roy's new book. Roy has a new book out, The Art of Leading: Truth, Love, and Empathy in Action. Now, Roy, if you weren't before this episode, you certainly are now the most frequent guest on the Future of Field Service podcast. I think you hold the record at this point for most visits. So thanks for coming again.
Absolutely.
So anyone that is a regular listener will know Roy from previous episodes. And even if you don't regularly listen to this podcast, Roy is well known in the service space for his thought leadership. And we're here today specifically to talk about some of the points in Roy's new book that stood out most to me, some of the things that after reading it, I am excited to pick his brain on. So, Roy, welcome back. And to start, can you just share a bit with everyone why you decided to write this book?
Yeah. So for the last several years, right, I've always mentored people. I've always provided like advice and counsel to people who were people leaders in various spaces, whether it was music, entertainment, podcast hosts, right, pastors, nonprofit leaders, executives. Well, one thing that I noticed is that I was answering a lot of the same questions. So whether somebody was a CEO, a manager, they owned a record label, people always had the same questions. And I was always trying to help people develop into leaders. And so I had a community of people that I was mentoring. And because I kept answering these kind of questions repetitively, I actually turned them into videos. I think, like on my YouTube channel, like I created this series of videos called the Leadership Lab. But even after creating those videos, which to answer like 80% of the questions that I typically got from my mentees, it basically hit me that like, well, I think people need this also in a more structured framework. And so I literally took the content that was in the YouTube videos that being the Leadership Lab, they're still up there. So for everybody who wants Audible, there are 13 YouTube videos they could check out as well. But yeah, so I basically took that structure, but then sat back and said, if I was having this conversation and walking through with somebody that I was individually mentoring, like how would I lay out the principles? What are the things I would want them to reflect on? And then also giving examples, right? Kind of like narrative stories of how these principles have played out. So that's basically what it came out of, right? I think at one point I was mentoring 57 people around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It was really like an efficiency play for me to be like, okay, like if I combine these answers, I can give it. But then just in travels, right, as you know, speaking at events, talking to other technology leaders, I realized that there is a significant gap. We have management training. We know how to get people up to date on our systems and our processes, but there isn't a lot of stuff out there to provide information that allows people to become a better leader, how to be a better person so that you can be a better leader, right? Because it's the being, like, who are you as a leader? But then it's also like the things that you have to do as a leader that can be challenging that we don't get a lot of advice on, right? We don't get a lot of advice on how to terminate people. We don't get a lot of advice on when to step down out of a leadership role, right? Like, so I wanted to put all of that together and construct it into a book. And that's what over the last year landed at that. And yeah, so now we've been pushing that out there and been enjoying the response thus far, even though it's not officially out yet, but a lot of people have read it already, which is great.
February 20th, right?
Yes.
Yes. We will come back to that at the end and let folks know where to get it, where to find it. So when I got the book in the mail, my first thought was, wow, this is going to be a quick read, right? And I actually like how in the intro you address that. Like I was not interested in writing more than I needed to make this more appealing on a bookshelf. And I really like that. I, a couple of years ago, attempted to write a book and it hasn't come to fruition yet. But that is one of the challenges when you are trying to publish a book is that there are these standards that the industry has that maybe they're outdated, maybe they're not. But the point being, this is something too that you mention, the way that it is structured. You're talking about these different principles, then you're giving some real world examples, sharing some of your own stories, and then you're giving these prompts. And you also mentioned that while, yes, you could sit down and read through the book fairly quickly, it's really not about just reading it and expecting magic to happen. It's about reading it and really thinking about how do I exhibit this trait or how do I need to improve in this area and doing the work, right? So really like that. Now, the first thing I want to address is from the first chapter. And to me, I loved it. It's about love.
Yeah.
But I do feel like when you think about the space you and I live in, it is a bit of a hot take when you say leaders should lead with love. So you say that you view love as a fundamental element that can empower you to excel in leadership and drive remarkable outcomes. This had me really reflecting on a lot of personal experience, because I think just because I have always been true to who I am, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on, I've always been one to say, I love this community, or I love you, or I love what I do, right? And there have been points, especially earlier in my career, where I think that made people uncomfortable because they're like, no, love is, you don't do that at work, right? So explain to people in your words why, yes, you do bring love to work and it can actually make you a better leader.
Yeah, right. And I think it starts with a fundamental thing like that. As people, we love. We just do. So like to act, we can pretend that we cut that off when we get to work, but we don't. The same way that we want people to respond to us being ill, the same way that we want to be cared for, as much as we may have been groomed or developed to ignore it in certain spaces, you still want it. None of us wants to be disliked. No one walks out the house like, I want to be around people who don't care about my well-being, who don't care about my family, who don't care about my health, who don't care about my finances. But it's almost like we're conditioned to assume that no one cares about your best interests. So you're on your own unless you're just with family. It's just, one, it's not true. I was in the military, right? And you know that, right? It's very rigid. We're all here for the same reason. You spend time around people, you grow to love them. And I think the thing is that the word love in itself is so romanticized that, as you know, I'm a parent, I'm an adoptive parent, I have 4 children, right? I love somebody who's not my biological child. I love my biological children. I love my wife. I love my family. But I also love the people that I mentor. I do ministry stuff. I love the people that I care for. So I think the problem is love is looked at romantically. Like that's the only kind of love, like relationship, spouse, significant other. And it's not. And I say it in the book, love is you wanting the best for somebody else. Mm-hmm. That's all that it is at a very basic level. Is like, I don't want you to be hurt. I don't want you to be broken. I don't want you to be stressed out. And as a leader, when I care about that, it influences our decisions. And your employees see it, and they feel it, and they know it. And as much as people may not expect it at work, they definitely respond in amazing ways when they do feel it. I don't know who first said it, but you hear the quote all the time. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. Mm-hmm. But that care is love at a very basic sense, because there's not a reward. I don't get anything out of it. But like, I want the best for you as another human being in the human race that's in this world trying to survive and to try to thrive and do productive things. And I think that's what we got to do, right? We got to get out of the romantic idea of love and then realize that there are different types of love we can experience, and not shutting ourselves off from that emotion, because it's healthy and it allows us to connect with people in a way that gets a level of commitment and understanding and followership, or whatever people want to call it, from the people who have to trust you to lead them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think you said at the beginning, like, you can't turn that off when you go to work. I think some people do, but I think that's part of the problem. And learning how to not feel you need to be 2 different human beings, and understanding that not only do you not have to turn that off, but maybe being more vulnerable and leaving it on at work will help you be more effective, I think is such a good point. Now, the second piece of this, also in the love chapter, but like, I might go back on my word and then say later, like, this was the most impactful thing. But okay, so here's number 1, right? I have like stars next to this. So you say, equity has become a popular term, but I truly believe that love is the only true path to equity. Tolerance and inclusion can easily become prisons for those in the out group, because to be given access without true consideration is a cruel illusion. This is such an important point. I think I have tried to articulate this clearly, not as well, but related to intent. When we talk about equity, like the intent someone has, are they trying to check a box, or is the intent pure? But to your point, I love how you tie this back to love, because it's about that. It isn't just tolerance. It isn't just forced inclusion. It is about truly appreciating people for who they are and what they bring to the table. Anything you want to say on that point?
I think you see it now. If you type DEI into the Google right now, you're going to see how DEI programs are coming under attack because they've been around, they've been funded, like states, cities, universities, they've spent millions and millions of dollars, and it actually hasn't reaped any difference that's significant or tangible. But it's for that reason. I've been a minority based on age, based on race, in like the field service industry as an executive since I've been in it. And I've been in the industry for 12 years. But it's very uncomfortable to be given a seat at a table, but not be given a microphone. And that's when I say it's a cruel illusion. You let me in the room and I think I can make an impact. I think my voice is going to be heard. I think you want me to bring other cultural experience, other perspectives to the table. And it's not. You just wanted to add me to the table so that you could check that off the box that you met a diversity quota or whatever the case is, because diversity, diverté in itself, the root of the word means like a disruption. It's a disruption of thought. There's a YouTube video I have that's called, "Are you a token or are you a totem?" Because like a totem pole, like each figure kind of represents a different part of the story. But I'm like, a token just lets you in. If you think about when we were in London, you put a token in the machine and spit out the little thing, like that's it. If you're not influencing the story, if the narrative isn't changing after you, then you're a token. You're not a totem. They're not using your introduction as something that opens doors or creates new conversations. But that's why that was important to me, because if you love your employees, I've been at companies before where I would not invite a minority to come to that employee because I love you too much. Like, I don't want you to be in this situation because it's uncomfortable. And there's a certain amount of tolerance that you have to have as the minority to actually deal in that environment, because they don't want to give you. You have to be more bold. You have to be more outspoken. You've got to be more direct, which everybody can't do. But if you love everybody, you genuinely want everyone's opinion to be heard. You want people's accommodations to be met, but you want to do it in a balanced way. You don't want to pivot too far to one direction or another direction, because then you wind up neglecting somebody. That love genuinely leads to inclusion. And I want to know how I can help you. If you have kids, if you don't have kids, if you have pets, if you don't have pets, right? Regardless of your lifestyle, regardless of your gender, regardless of your marital status, I want the best for everyone. And then so you take all of those things into consideration, because otherwise you're opening the door. But if you don't give somebody space and if you don't actually give somebody a voice, it's just unfair, right? And then someone's there and you're using them to tout this diversity, but then their voice isn't heard. So that achieves the goal of the program, but it's not loving towards that person, because the person is there, but they're still not seen, they're still not heard. And the only thing they're helping you do is achieve a quota.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I just think it's such an important point. So you talk a little bit about part of the culture we're coming from is this outcome at all cost mentality, right? And a lot of people are still there. And I think that's where a lot of poor leadership habits come from. If we give people the benefit of the doubt, which I think they largely deserve, not always, but largely, a lot of people that aren't leading well are doing so because they themselves aren't being led well, and or they are feeling very pressured to perform in a certain way that I think we're just all realizing there's a better path to, right? But the last thing I wanted to say about love is, you say we want or need employees who love what they do. They deserve leaders who love them for it. And I think this is just, again, like, it's a give and take, right? If we want high performers, we want people who are empowered and who are impactful and who make a difference in the eyes of our customers, we need to treat them the way they deserve to be treated, right? Like, otherwise that expectation is completely unrealistic. So I just think like the whole point about love is such a good point, because it's something you wouldn't hear a lot of, or at least I haven't heard a lot of people say in that way. However, I do want to keep going, because I want to get to the point where I don't want people to think that you're just like this fluffy guy that's like,
that's just the first chapter.
You know what I mean? Yes, it is.
It's not 7 chapters on love. It's just one.
No, just one. But I think,
but it takes you a long time to get through it when you actually think about it. It's
important.
Yeah.
It's important. And it's the reason I said it's a hot take is it is a very stark contrast to what a lot of us and a lot of leaders have experienced and been taught is maybe effective, right? And so, and I think coming back to the equity point, I don't think that can be underpinned enough. But you talk then about this idea of love without accountability becomes enabling. Now, I want to pause on that and come back to it because I'm going in order of my notes. But on the authenticity piece, and I'm obviously skipping over some things because one, I want people to read the book. Two, we don't have time to talk about every chapter. So I have notes on other things, but I'm going to skip ahead to authenticity because I think when we talk about like, are there people who are shutting off parts of themselves when they step into the office or to their work environment? That is a big part of the problem. And again, for whatever reason, I just have always naturally inclined to be myself. I was actually mentoring someone earlier this week, and they made a decision that they made because they're following their gut, but they're getting a lot of criticism for it. And what I said is the discomfort you feel from people criticizing your choice to follow your gut instinct is far less than the discomfort you would feel if you did not stay true to yourself. That's just some people that comes, I don't want to say easier to, it's not easy to
Not
always
easy,
be
no.
yourself. However, some people are willing to fight the fight more than others. Some people will stifle themselves to fit in environments that they feel they need to fit into. And so I think this idea of authenticity is really important because you say, when you truly love and respect the authentic version of yourself, you grow to have a greater appreciation for the unique authenticity of others. Authenticity serves as an inspiration for others to do the same, leading to a collective unleashing of potential. This is where I feel like there's a lot of concepts you talk about in this book that are really very mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
It has to feel better for a leader to come to work and feel they are being themselves. And also in demonstrating that you appreciate others' authenticity and unique skills, talents, opinions, and voices. I like how you say that, the collective unleashing of potential. So how, though, do you kind of kick this off? If you are a leader who is not already practicing this idea, right, that maybe you are keeping certain views more quiet, or you are showing up in a way that feels less than completely genuine because you have felt you have to. How do you sort of unlock more of this?
Yeah. And I think, one, I have to reiterate, right? I don't like authenticity requires, there are levels of authenticity that I think come with maturity.
Mm-hmm.
And right, and you and I talked about just even the session we had yesterday, right? And maturity isn't about age. Mm-hmm. Right? There are some personal opinions you have that are not very well developed or very well thought out. So I would not be the one to suggest that you should just go express them if you don't understand them in a way, right? So when I talk about authenticity, it's really like, what skills do you have? What are your interests, right? What are you passionate about? And then like, what are reasonable ways that you can introduce that into work, right? Because just like conformity is contagious because everyone is doing it, so can authenticity. When you're authentic, the people that you interact with also exchange authentic details. And you know this, you're traveling, you say something about your sons, I'm probably going to mention my daughter or my son. You say something about your husband, or if somebody mentions their spouse, you mention their spouse. So like, there are different windows that you open based on what you share that let other people know that it's safe to share that. I mean, I've known you for years, like, you know, I'm a Christian, you know, I'm a pastor and all that other stuff, but like, someone asked me what I did yesterday. I mentioned going to church. Now they mentioned the church that they went to, or the church that they grew up in, or like their families. And I didn't introduce it. I just told you what I did, but I didn't withhold from you the fact that I went to church on Sunday, because there's no reason why I should be hiding that piece of information. It is authentically who I am. So I think that's the thing. I think it's gradual, and I think it actually becomes easier and it becomes contagious because you realize you thought that was a window that shouldn't be open because it's too personal, it's too vulnerable. And when you finally do let it out, it has the opposite effect. I have several chronic medical conditions and illnesses. I kept that to myself for years until I almost, I had to be hospitalized during an executive outing in Tucson, Arizona. And I drove myself to the emergency room and everybody was freaked out about it. But like, once people knew that, I thought it was going to make them see me as weaker. They all thought I was Superman after that. They were like, how the heck have you been doing all of this stuff? And you have that. I was like, okay, I thought that was something people would see as a weakness. And so I held it back from like the authentic expression of myself. And it actually increased the way that people respected me and the things that I was able to do. And that's the other thing. When people do respond to the authentic you, it's not the response that you thought. I did hip hop for 20 years. I thought that executives would think that that's like contrary. Most people were like, oh man, you're a writer. You do it. Like, it was weird to me that everybody was like interested and they thought it was cool. I thought people would look down on me because of it. And so I think as you start to open those windows and you gradually start to expose people to other parts of your authentic self, you start realizing that like people aren't going to respond the way that you think they do. And you start learning from other people as they start to share as well. It just becomes like a contagious cycle of sharing information. And I'll just give a quick thing. Like, we have a Slack channel at my current company that's water cooler topics. And we'll just drop random things in there. Like, if you were a car, what kind of car would you be? Or like, if you could take a vacation anywhere, what would it be? Some people share, some people don't, but you get to see some very interesting sides of people. And then you can look at the sub thread, right? And you see the replies and the comments and, oh, I didn't know you did that. And it's just, we're interesting, complicated, complex people. And it's interesting to know it. That's why I talk about leadership as art. Everybody is like a painting, but like we act like we're just four corners of a canvas. There's not. There's a lot more detail to it. Right. And the more detail that we get, the better we understand people and how we can use them and how we can empower them and what they're passionate about. Everybody doesn't want money. Everybody doesn't want time off. Everybody doesn't want a job promotion. Everybody doesn't want to lead people. But if we're not authentically sharing with people and letting them share with us, we don't get to that level of detail.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting to me about this is it starts with acceptance, because you talk about the more you respect your authenticity, the more you appreciate that in others. And so I think it starts with, this is another, I think, difference in leadership that has to do with velocity of change, right? Not too long ago, in a far more stagnant environment, there was this leadership mentality of needing to know it all. Like, you as the leader were the person in charge and you should know all, right? You should have the
you are
answers.
also the expert.
You should, That's not possible today. It just is not possible. There is no one that is good at everything that needs to be part of a solution, whatever you're serving, whatever your offering is, et cetera. So there's this acceptance as a leader of not needing to be all, just needing to be you and to bring the best of other people together. And I think then when you can accept that reality and you can let go of the pride or the ego that makes you feel you have to have all the answers, and you start looking for other people's strengths, other people's uniqueness. But this is where, to me, this ties in so much with diversity. Because once you can start to appreciate the different, unique abilities, experiences, opinions, ideas so many humans have in a way that allows you, like you said, to unleash this potential. I just think this is a point that, again, so many of these things are touched on, but they're not really taken to heart. And I think that's your point with, like, do the exercises, really put the time in and think about these things. Is the idea of authenticity, like, what does it actually mean? And what is that potential? I think it's really tremendous when you think about how much room there is here for people to be better leaders and allow other people to be better versions of themselves. So the other thing, and this is maybe like not a huge point, at least to me, I'm interviewing you, so I'm not making it about me, but like I'm talking about what I related to. So you talk about the difference between work-life balance and work-life harmony, right? And I like this point a lot because, again, I guess maybe this also blends over into like the authenticity, right? If you are being you, you are being you when you're at work, you're being you when you're at home, you're not taking off in disguise and stepping into a whole different environment. So the idea of harmony and the blend of it all makes more sense. But I think one of the important points here, particularly a lot of the conversations you and I have had before on the podcast and other places, is related to younger talent, right? And recruiting and attracting the right people. You talk about modeling balance. So as leaders, modeling that is what empowers your team to be able to achieve the harmony and really to know it's possible. And I think this is a trap a lot of leaders fall into as well, which is like, this job is my life. I've worked 80 hours this week, or I never log off. And I mean, one, that needs to be a personal reflection, right? Because one, is it true? And if it's true, like, you probably need better harmony yourself.
Yeah.
But two, if it's an embellishment of the truth, that's a problem in and of itself. And three, what precedent is that setting? And why do you think that people would want to sign up to be part of an environment where they are not allowed to have other aspects of a life than their work? I guess my question to you on this point, though, is once you do get to a certain level of leadership and you have that pressure and et cetera, how do you still maintain and model that balance?
Yeah, I think I think one is it's dealing with the myth that balance is about dividing hours amongst tasks, right? That's why I talk about harmony versus work-life balance. That it's like, well, you worked really hard, so take a day off, but you don't gain back in one day what you missed over 6. That doesn't give you back the baseball game or the recital or the dinners or anything else. So that might give you balance in numbers, but it doesn't give you harmony, because there are some things that we may be risking that you can't get back, right? That you can't. Time is one thing that you can't really negotiate with. It's gone and it's gone. But I think modeling it just takes one. Some of it comes from authenticity. You talk about what you do in your free time. You don't talk about your job like it's a burden, because you've actually found some harmony and some balance. And right, there's nothing worse for me, for leaders, when like your employee comes to you and is like, oh man, I'm tired. I've been working 50, 60 hours. It's the response that you said, well, I've been working 80. Mm-hmm. That's not the right response, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you're working 60 and they're working 80, then somebody is poorly planning and forecasting the demand that you have. Right. But then also, as leaders, our job responsibility is different. So harmony also looks different depending on what your job is. My 12-hour day is from the comfort of my own home, where every amenity that I want is within 20 feet of my desk, right? People who don't know, this is my actual office. So like, I can step out of my office and go see my son. My children are homeschooled. I can literally see my family all day. So a 12-hour workday for me, it's still 12 hours with my family. A 12-hour workday for one of my field service technicians driving across Ohio is a cold, lonely day by himself, away from family, in a car by himself, like either listening to music or podcasts. That 12-hour day is not the same. So even if me and that technician work the same hours, I would never compare my day to theirs, because he's sacrificing more in that 12-hour day than I am.
Yeah.
Right. Versus when I'm traveling or something else. So I think that's the other thing, is that understanding that harmony also has to do with the job, and like what doing that job is requiring you to sacrifice compared to what you care about, right? Like what you hold dear, whether it's your kids, your pets. Either you just want to be in your own bed, you want to be home, right? Some people, it's a sacrifice to be away from home. Mm-hmm. They would rather be at home. They have things to take care of and responsibilities. And so I think that's the challenge with harmony, because we try to give people these cookie cutter things, right? Well, do what I do. Like, well, I did this, but like, they're not you. Their priorities are not the same. Their lifestyle is not the same. And a lot of times as a leader, you're not talking to people who have the same job as you. Mm-hmm. If you are the leader, you distinctly have a different job than everyone else. So my directors, my managers, my supervisors, my technicians all have different jobs. So it's like, we've got to be authentic enough to say, look, this is how I've achieved balance based on my priorities, and then help walk them through as a leader. What are your priorities? What are you sacrificing? And then what can I do to help you balance that out? Because like, there's going to be required sacrifices, but then like, how can we balance that out? Like, what can I give you? Can I give you weekends off? Let's figure out flexible schedule. Like, let me keep you in market for different periods of time instead of having you travel. And then just working out that balance. But it's also understanding what people are sacrificing. And I think authenticity, we hide that, right? We don't talk about the fact that this much travel is impacting my marriage. We don't talk about the fact that my teenage kids are mad at me because I miss all of because we feel like that has to be hampered down. It has to be minimized, when most leaders, right, who are just reasonable human beings who have their own responsibilities, would respond to that. But one of the challenges is, and that's why I say everyone needs to read the book, not just leaders, because as leaders, some of us want to hear this stuff, but we don't, because people have been conditioned, keep it to yourself, that's a home problem, not a work problem. And we wind up having to pull that information out of people. So I think the more that people are authentic and they talk about what they're sacrificing that they think is creating an imbalance, that we can work to help them find harmony, but they have to be honest enough to say, like, I'm sacrificing this and this might put me in an imbalanced situation where I'm going to lose more than I want to or that I'm willing to. Because sometimes that answer is, I will help you find another job. And I've done that before. Like, it's you're on call 24/7 and that's ruining your relationship. Let me move you to another role where you're not on call, where you don't have to travel. And that saved people's marriages before. Just switching somebody into another open role, but you've got to have that conversation.
Yeah. No, I think what this looks like for everyone is definitely going to be different. But I think there's a couple things that I want to say. One is you have to be honest, but that honesty has to be demonstrated by leaders. And that's the whole point. If employees at any level are struggling with harmony, but see their leader just grinding it out, you know what I mean? Like, without any honesty of their own, they're going to be far more inclined to keep it bottled up, right? And the second thing I wanted to say is, as a working mom, I do just want to point out here that there is benefit to dads, men, helping set the precedent that kid-related things are part of life, right? So like, there is this stigma of the mom is the one that needs more flexibility because she's doing the doctor's appointment or the school this or whatever. When you start to see male leaders harmonizing around those same things, it really levels the playing field in an important way. But I think also this is a really important point, again, to just reflect on in terms of what is the environment you and your company are creating, and are the type of people you want to have be a part of it going to want to be a part of it. I don't think you would mind me sharing this, but I was in London week before last at our sales kickoff. And when I was leaving Friday, I was talking to our new CEO and I said, well, when I get in the air and I have Wi-Fi, I'll send you a blah, blah, blah. And he's like, or just take a nap or read a book or like enjoy the flight. You could do it Monday. Like, it's been a long week. And I didn't expect that. And to me, I did it anyway because it wasn't a big deal. Again, I'm pretty genuine. Like, if I need a nap, I'll take a nap. If I want to send an email, I'll send an email. You know what I mean? But like, just him saying that, it's about normalize being human. Normalize being human. And the fact that like, we are all human. Yes, the needs look different for everyone, but like, if you as a leader can normalize being human and being your whole self at work, then people are going to be more honest. They're going to ask for what they need. You're going to be able to help them problem solve. And ultimately, it ties back to you will get more return on your investment if you treat people well than if you don't. There's two more points I want to try and get to before we run out of time. Now, this is the chance, okay, to make sure people don't think that you're just like on some hippie peace, love vibes in this book, right? Because we talk about some of the harder points. And I think this is an important one, is the only way to maintain a healthy team is to remove unhealthy elements. I shared a session recently on the podcast with a woman from Vattenfall in the Nordics. It was great. She talked very transparently about their successful efforts to create a more people-centric culture. But one of the hardest things was she worked hard early on to put in place a no assholes policy. And she talks about how it was the right thing to do. But like, this is where the executive leaders are really tested on their commitment, because then you get into, well, they're a high performer, so should we make an exception or whatever, right? So just talk about this idea that like, and also you can love someone, but recognize that they are harming the overall environment. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'll start with a very basic children example, right? Like I said, I have 3 biological and adopted child. I love all of my kids, but I'm not going to let my son just punch his older sister. Right. And it'd be like, well, he's getting his homework. But no, right. Like, there's a balance. Right. So like, the impact of every individual, it's felt somewhere else. And if you don't pay attention to that, then like, you don't love your employee. And that's why it goes back to love. Right. Because love also includes discipline. It includes correction. It includes right? It's not just this romantic thing. It's like, I want the best thing for you, but allowing somebody to fail, allowing somebody to be disliked, allowing somebody to be toxic, allowing somebody to be misogynistic or racist or discriminatory, like none of those things are healthy for that person either individually. It's a cancer in them that is causing a problem elsewhere. So you absolutely need to deal with it. And we talk about like managing the performance and driving to outcomes. You and I have talked about behavior-based recruiting for years, right? But like behavior is an essential aspect of company culture. And we as leaders have to take responsibility for our culture. And if there are, we talk about at our company and we talk about culture killers, like who's killing the culture? Because you can have one person out of 100 that will kill the culture. Because if the culture is supposed to be accountability and you treat people a certain way and certain things aren't accepted, but then you allow a person to do it because of what they can individually contribute or what they bring to the table, then you've negated the entire culture. So like, if there's an exception to everything, then there is no rule. You can't let people be an exception to the culture. And the culture isn't just about lip service. It's not just about outcomes. It's about behavior. It's about interpersonal relationships. It's about respect. It's about equity. And when you don't have that, those people need to go. And even in that, you can do that in a loving way. And a loving way is being honest, which is another chapter, right? I know we can't go through all of them, but like, it's being honest about why you fire people. Like, it always has frustrated me to sit in executive meetings or whatever else when you're talking about the person getting fired and all of the things that was said in that room about that person that are honest feedback about their impact, about their performance, isn't actually shared with them when they're terminated. Like, no one tells them the negative impact they were having on the team, how their behavior was being perceived, the toxic environment that they were creating. And then what do? They just leave thinking, oh, you don't understand my greatness, right? Like, I'm just different. And then they go to another company and create the same toxic environment and the same toxicity. Like, I found that when you actually tell people the truth and in a way where they can relate to it, and they're like, you know what? I've had a lot of people say, like, no one's ever told me that. And all these people are older than me. You've been 20, 30 years. You've been let go from that company. You pushed out of that department. They moved you over there. But no one's ever just told you were annoying and that you're rude and that you cut people off when they're talking and that you're inconsiderate of people's times and different time zones. Like, giving people that basic feedback, that honest feedback, gives people an opportunity to either change, right, and get in line with the culture, or most people will actually just leave because the culture doesn't fit their behavior and they will go find another company that will accept it, right? And then you don't even have to worry about termination and all the other stuff because people will leave when the culture is contrary to the way that they regularly behave. But we've got to hold true. The culture can't just be something on paper. It has to be behavior that we hold people accountable for and not just objective performance. Companies are very bad at dealing with behavioral performance issues because everyone's afraid of getting sued and the subjectivity of it. But no, they're very easy. There are ways that you can measure, right? Like the behavioral impact of somebody to where you can make a definitive line to say you're creating more of a negative impact than you are positive. So we've got to part ways. But that's a part of leadership. That's a part of love as well, is honest discipline and correction when it needs to be done.
Yeah. This is a good segue to my last question. Now, there's a part on page 135, not that you need to open it, but it did confuse me a little bit. And I want to ask clarity. You talk about your belief that great leaders can change culture, but then you also talk about what happens when toxicity settles into upper management. At what point is it time to make the conscious choice to not be the one that tries to change the culture, but rather to go elsewhere? I do believe that you can change culture, but to what extent?
It ties to work-life harmony because what are you willing to sacrifice? Trying to influence culture as a leader downwards, I can remove the people who are toxic. I can develop the people who are challenged. When you're the leader trying to influence culture upwards, can't remove my coworkers. I can't remove the CEO. I can't remove the board. And there has to become a point to where, like, if there are things that I absolutely feel like need to be changed for the overall benefit of the culture and feel like I can do nothing about it, that's not a healthy place for me to be. But also for me to keep fighting against it is not a healthy place for me to be either. So it's like when the fight when the outcome of the fight isn't worth the sacrifice, you've got to make that determination. And it might be you fight for a little while and you see what the impact is. And then you fight for a little while more and you see what the impact is. And I'm like you, as much as I think that leaders can influence change, and I've personally done it, I've seen other people who've done it well, also seen people who beat their fist against brick walls and just wound up being bruised, battered, and then just sitting there, right? Where I don't think that's acceptable. So I think there are a lot of times where you can influence that, but it's also, there is a level of personal sacrifice and commitment that's required to do that. And that's a harmony choice. On top of doing my regular job, do I want to spend all of this time managing up to try to influence culture? And it also has to be, how bad is it, right? Like if it's really bad, that it's ultimately going to come into my organization, it's going to affect my team and the people that I'm trying to protect, that's the difference. But yeah, it's how much are you willing to sacrifice to make that change happen? Because at the end of the day, as much as we want to lead at work, we also have other places where we're needed as leaders. And if I'm burning myself out and 90% of my energy is going to try to change culture at work, changing the culture of my family, I'm not changing the culture of my community. There's a balance, right? So I think there are different times, and there's even different times in life. You could be the person that's fighting constantly. And then honestly, a lot of my coworkers are colleagues. Now you have the aging parent you have to take care of. And I think I mentioned that in the book. Or now you have kids that are getting older that have more sports involved. So it's like at these different periods of time, you have different levels of commitment that you can give in each area of life. And sometimes it might become too much. And now it's time to hand it over to somebody else who might have more time. It could be that leader that can focus 70% of their time for the next 2 or 3 years getting it done. For me, just because of where I've been at different points, like I'm at the point now where like work is very rarely going to get more than 70% of me. There were times in my life where I was 90% work and I was 10% home. I was 80. I'm 50 to 60 now. It's got to be seasonal if you're trying to push me further than that. Because I'm already sacrificed a lot of years of my kids' life, of my marriage, of time with my family, that I'm just not willing to sacrifice.